I think I had mentioned before that the Blackmagic, the biggest cinema URSA spatial camera is out.
Yep.
But even the test footage on that, it's running like for like a moderate record time, it's like it's like multiple terabytes.
Right.
So it's like, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, you're going to need your own personal data center for this spatial video.
I know it. We're going to need.
And next, you're going to need your own power plant.
I need the small
small modular
SMR.
reactors. Yes.
Got it.
Everybody's going to have their personal power pack to sort of power their own data center their own video. Yes.
I know what I'm asking Santa for this year.
Right.
Dear Santa,
I just have one SMR this year. I'm gonna sort of be conservative with this.
And maybe a little plutonium just to be safe, right? So we can figure out a way to make all the things. Yeah, awesome. All right, well, I don't know, we can just
yes.
Time to get going. So Andrew, I had a thought. I was listening earlier this week to our episode on eVTOLs that came out.
Yes.
And on my way to campus this morning, I literally was stuck in one of those traffic jams that's for no reason. Right. It just happens.
Yep.
And I sat there and I was like, you know what would fix this?
Where is my eVTOL? Yes. Just press that button, elevate up and get across.
Suddenly I was like, you know what? That $128,000 for like the dirt bike version. I was like, you know what? Suddenly that sounded pretty damn good.
But this is such a privileged approach, because you realize that if every single other person in that traffic jam had them, sort of hundreds of cars lifting at the same time.
Because I was thinking about it, and of course, like after the show and stuff like that too, I keep thinking about it. And it is one of those things where like, because I get it. That's one of these points is like, it would alleviate all the congestion. But then that's the exact and you're like, right, if only Sean is the only one in the Phoenix Valley area allowed to use this device.
Now you're thinking like a tech entrepreneur.
You know what? Maybe there is hope for me yet. Maybe I can become that tech billionaire. I've got the mindset for it. Me only, baby.
Yep, there we are. Yes.
Whatever it costs.
The future is bright. As long as it's just you. Right.
My future is bright. You all might be suffering in the pits of despair, but don't worry. The wash from my rotors will keep you cool.
And of course we joke, but this is such a big thing when we come to talk about tech and society and the future. It is easy to imagine amazing futures if you make sure that hardly anybody gets hold of the tech. As soon as everybody gets it, you're back to square one.
Yeah. Or
unless you find a new way forward.
That's it. Or if your version of reaching that pinnacle is by stepping upon everybody below, right? It's like, sure, I'll just step on everybody to get where I need to go. And,
And then you have the expansionist theory. It's the trickle-down theory that says technology trickles down from the top to the bottom. But if you're at the lead, you've always got to be 2 or 3 steps ahead. So you're always at the top of the pyramid.
Always have to be out there to sort of make that.
Right.
It's wild. And I think, it's just been funny because I've been thinking about that a lot lately because I think,
This is what these podcasts do. People think it's just a podcast for just us talking. This is our thinking space where we actually do the heavy lifting of our research.
I mean, you cross this threshold right here, and this can be a dangerous room.
It really can be. Yes, it'll change your mind. It'll change the way you think. It'll change how you behave.
One thing is for sure. When we leave this room, we're not the same as when we came into it. One way or another. You be the judge.
Just a slightly worrying thought.
We're not the same as when we leave. But what I love about these conversations, and in that episode in particular, because it's been I don't know that one has been
stuck.
Maybe because again I've been doing a lot of drive. I've been crisscrossing the valley area here in Phoenix, and I've been stuck in a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
But again, it's fighting that urge of this imagined futures, right? Where you're like, wow, this would be so amazing to just hop in this thing and go. But then, it's like all those other realities come in when you suddenly go by, like, it's pretty a common occurrence on almost every day coming in. You see those 3 or 4 cars on the side that have all bumped up to get, usually, luckily, these are nothing but like, fender bender type things, right? But, there's the carnage along the side of all the broken bits and the people standing outside their cars getting their insurance. And then you're like, yeah, but in the air, right? So even with best intentions, and this idea, that congestion comment really sort of stuck with me because, if if you're the only one to alleviate the congestion, you're great.
Yes.
But if 50% do, 30% do,
it's
you're
a
now
mess.
just trading one congestion for one that's even more complicated to figure out.
Which is why you absolutely have to have a systems approach.
Yeah.
And it's a systems approach that includes people, behavior, society, policy, all of the things that are easy to forget about, but actually are critical to how these systems work.
Yeah.
And I think so often people forget that. They see what they think is the easy solution, and they forget that that's the minuscule little pinprick at the top of a massive mountain of other things that influence it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an interesting piece, because I think the other thing, I kind of came in with just a couple of things in my pocket, right?
And already we're diverging and sort of going,
which is fine, which is all good, because it's all related.
Yeah.
Also, last episode we also had talked about the Moviegoer's Guide
to the Future. Yes.
Yep. And we had digested that, and that has stuck with me as like everything's sticking with.
Right.
Also, right now too, like I'm teaching a course right now too that is heavily focusing on futures thinking and foresight, and so that has also stuck with me as well, because I think if we just pick on these flying flying vehicles for a minute, I mean, that is a wonderful. Especially if anyone out who's listening is like, oh, that's exciting. That's a great opportunity to engage in futures thinking with, by using that as a way to sort of going in, because as you had just mentioned, imagining this maybe preferable future for yourself or whatever, that's a great starting point. But then comes all the work of unpacking all the other things. What are all, because the idea again of, and maybe I'll say that we'll get into the cold, we'll stop the cold open here maybe, and we'll get into it. But I think it's a great opportunity to kind of remind people about the power of futures thinking, because it can spread, I mean, again, it doesn't have any tie to any domain. Right. It's across industry. It's across domain. It's across profession. It can be used at different scales, from the individual all the way up to the highest organization.
That even from your personal life, all the way through to the job you do and the organization you're part of.
There's absolutely value in it from the smallest single individual layer to the largest organizational or national, massive layer. So, let's just we'll pause here and we'll
heat us up.
Yeah, we're gonna get some fire. There's some fire this morning. All right, here we go.
Initializing waveform.
Modulating signals for transmission.
Exploring the possible, probable, and preferable futures.
Welcome to Modem Futura.
Welcome back.
Well, welcome back. That's a long break we took. Welcome. I'm Sean Leahy, joined by my podcast host extraordinaire,
Andrew Maynard.
That's the only way I can introduce you now. I love it. And of course, that means you are listening to Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like, what will it mean to be human in the future? And I want to point out, the little tagline that I read and get right most of the time.
Yes.
I butcher it every now and then. Has these three futures in it. The possible, probable, and preferable futures. And those are lifted directly out of essentially this idea. It comes from future studies, but which is what has informed this idea of futures thinking. And kind of coming back to that, we've done an episode a long time ago. It was towards the beginning. I forget which number it was.
Goodness me, yes. I think
Ruth Wiley had joined us for that.
Right.
Who is one of the three, along with Bea Rodriguez Friends, and it was one of the trio of conspirators that we have.
And you are the third one.
Yes. Along with myself, we have started a community of practice here at ASU for futures, basically just casting a wide net, looking for people who are already engaged in these kind of these works, or who wants to be engaged, who's interested, because it is. One of these things. I mean, I think if I could be guilty of one thing for sure, it is always trying to convert people into thinking, into adopting some, at least, of these.
You are a futures evangelist. Does anybody use that term anymore? Remember when every tech company had their tech evangelist?
They did.
But you are the futures evangelist.
I don't know what that. Yes, I'm trying to decide if that word, if you want to jettison that word.
Right.
Not
I
sure.
can see that. So actually, we're going to come back to this if we talk about the app that you've been showing me.
Oh, yes.
To see whether it sort of captures that grimace, as I say, futures evangelist.
I should have been looking at it.
Right.
We're foreshadow. I've got a fun tool that it's like my laptop is increasingly getting warm, so I maybe should have stopped it, but I don't know. Yeah. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, I think again to if you're new to the idea, a concept of futures thinking, I don't want to hit it like overly hard today, but I want to kind of set it as a background to a lot of the things that we can talk about. Flying cars or any new or advanced or convergent technology is a great opportunity to really engage in this if you're not already doing this work. But super briefly, futures thinking can be described as essentially, some people will call it a process. I call it a mindset. Okay. Or even you could extend it to if you start trying to convert people, it becomes a philosophy, I suppose.
A religion? No, maybe not that far.
I don't know if I would go that far. But definitely becomes a way of being and a way of approaching the world. Mm-hmm. So not just your life, not just things that you're interested in, but it's a way of approaching the complexity, the uncertainty, the ambiguity, the speed of the world around us.
Right. Yes.
Because it is,
and doing it in a nuanced way. And this to me is really important in a world where increasingly things are polarized and people feel as if they have to have a stance that they take and hit people over the head with, and that is their brand. Yeah. This is an approach that actually doesn't decide before you've done anything, what is right and what is wrong. It helps you find a way forward in a really messy, complex world.
Yes. And more to that, right? And I've got a little description I pulled that I can read here that's just kind of this serves as a very generic description, which of course, different organizations that run futures thinking workshops or things, or even individual futurists or whatever, may have their own take on the description of it. But essentially, it's this process or mindset of exploring of exploring, imagining and investigating multiple potential futures to make informed strategic decisions in the present. Involves understanding current social, technological, environmental trends, scanning for signals of change, and considering potential long-term consequences of current actions. The goal, I like they got this part right. The goal isn't to predict a single future, but to develop a range of possibilities or futures, right? And identify preferable outcomes, thereby fostering innovation, resilience, and sustained growth in organizations and in individuals. So that's kind of like a very generic term. Yes, my own description of it tends to have a little bit more loaded language.
Okay. But are you going to give us a little snippet of that?
Well, I think the idea here, because the biggest question always when futures thinking comes up is what's the difference between or predicting the future? That's always the first, it's sort of like the standard cards, right? When you're like, we're going to engage in futures thinking. No, that is not learning how to predict the future. Right. If we did, Andrew and I would not be podcasting from us.
One of the things I always tell my students is the only thing that's certain about the future is that nothing is certain.
The only thing certain is uncertainty.
Right.
If we could predict the future, this podcast would be happening right now on a yacht in the Mediterranean, and not because we would have made gazillions of dollars.
Wouldn't exist because we'd have other things to do.
I'd be like, I'd just be like Scrooge McDuck swimming in my money bin if I could predict the future.
You're revealing too much about yourself.
Or you know what? We'd have like one of those like private like space stations floating, so we could like, I don't know. And very quickly, you can see that vision also is a shared vision of like a Bond villain or something.
See, this is it.
I'm like, I'm sure
your secret aspiration.
There's a conversion here. There's a Venn diagram of a healthy overlap between tech billionaires and Bond villains.
There we
right?
are.
That's like,
that's obvious. All that's lacking is the white cat in many cases.
Which hey,
which also should come as an accessory. If you're a tech billionaire, go to the tech billionaire accessory
store. Oh my God,
store,
I love that.
It's white cat.
It's like, congratulations on your first trillion. Here's your cat. Or, at this point, why not just have like a direwolf bioengineered for yourself?
I was wondering how much you have to sort of bring in to get your own private volcano island.
Oh, yes. Always with that, Well, and so
Sorry, total.
This is why I love it. I love where we end up with this thing, where we start with an earnest call to be like, engage in futures thinking, everybody, to like, when I'm a Bond,
I just bring the tone right down.
When I'm a Bond villain, I shall do.
But the point is, it's about society as a whole, communities as a whole. It's not about you as an individual. It's not about alone.
Right. And it's about figuring out a way to navigate the uncertainties that the future will bring.
Yep.
So what it is never, right? And it's like, we just talked about this last night in class too. So if any of my students are listening, you're getting it twice. What it never is predicting the future.
Yep.
However, what it is doing is giving you lots of ways to investigate what is happening today. How do we get from where we were to today?
Yep.
And also investigating all of these possibilities of where we might go, given all of the variables and complexities of the world around us, and trying to make sense of that, to navigate those uncertainties with something that gives us a way of doing that with agency. Now we feel we are an active participant in this, and not just something. The future doesn't happen to you. You are a part of creating the future.
Creating it. And that we, because as soon as you say we, somebody's going to ask who's the we. To me, it's everybody. Everybody who's got a stake in the future is an active participant in making it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the point of future, and one of the things is when we've had Ruth on before, we've talked to her. One of the things that is really fun and engaging is the work that she has been doing with others as well, is really working at trying to get futures thinking into K-12 school, to start this process early.
Yep.
I'm doing it right. We're doing it right now from, just like a broader layer, but it's one of these things because it brings this different mindset from right off the bat, that inclusion of we.
Yep.
And while again, you can do this exercise from an individual perspective of, I'm curious about what my future is, the we is always ever present, because it takes into account all of where you are. What, you aren't isolated.
Yep.
You exist in all of these different communities that you identify with.
Yep.
You exist in professional, family scenarios, professional scenarios. You live in a city somewhere. That city is inside some other construct.
So pretty much everything you do has got consequences within that community. And so it's really interesting because some of my previous work around risk innovation, where we didn't talk about it in the future sense, but it's exactly this, is this idea that within a complex society, everything you do is connected to a gazillion other people, and how your actions affect other people, that then rebounds on how their responses affect you.
Sure.
So you cannot do anything without at least beginning to understand or recognize that really complex web of interactions.
Absolutely. And also recognizing, some people, kind of that rhetorical question is like, why now?
Right.
Well, we've also described in many cases, right? I mean, our show is a prime example of how fast and all the different things that are happening and changing. And so while the use of futures thinking is,
been around for a while.
It has been around. I mean, people have been engaged in this work forever without even knowing it, without calling it anything, right? But even still, the work has been relevant forever. But perhaps I would argue even more so now, because this like whiplash effect of the amount of use the terms here, the acceleration of change, right? I mean, AI is the perfect example. I mean, if you look, 2.5 years ago is
nearly 3 years,
almost 3 years ago as we come up to the fall here, but still 3 years, and how much has changed in those 3 years alone compared to the 10 years before that.
That's it. Yes,
right. And we know you feel this. And if people are out there listening to this podcast and they're like, you're right. I do. Yes. One, you should acknowledge that it's okay to feel that change in the speed and the uncomfortable feelings that come with that, of feeling like you can't keep up, you can't catch up. This is a bigger issue, I think. Perhaps, it certainly has an impact in the AI space, but even maybe more broadly on the technology space is the confidence, the confidence in the things that you have, the confidence of things being there tomorrow, the confidence of things doing what they said they were going to do, all those things. So it is moving fast. And one of the things I also really love about this idea of futures thinking is it does get its base, right, and has drawn more recently from a growing field of futures studies, which is, in the world of higher education, it is a newer field because it doesn't have its roots in
and
hundreds
you should
and
actually
hundreds
say
of
a
years.
little bit about what that means, because future studies isn't studying the future. It's studying this whole process of how we understand that relationship with the future.
Exactly. And understanding, and also with it. So future studies as a discipline, if, to put it in its simplest form, because there'll be someone out there who's like, no, that's not accurate.
Right. Yes.
I mean, really, it is the study of how we think about the future, it's not studying, again, we're not predicting the future, but it is understanding the mindset of how things are moving, connecting and being able to be aware and look for all of those different, I'm going to throw a lot of terms out there, right? Signals, trends, drivers, these things that indicate that shifts are boiling up, they're happening. But also to do that, there's this other word, we've talked about it briefly before. This is a concept of a megatrend.
Yes.
And so quickly, even now, as I'm talking, I can tell, like, this is not a simplistic thing. It is a big, it's a big nebulous space at times.
It's a 5-dimensional spider's web.
It is, right? And it's like, it really, and I do like that because it really does also allow you to start imagining things in a much more dimensional way.
Right.
Because you're familiar with like an X and Y coordinate, right? You have two axes that you're doing. Well, then you can add a third dimension of like the Z, or for everyone, the Z axis out there for everybody else.
This is a British show, Sean.
We have a huge international audience, so I will throw the Z out there. I actually prefer I didn't grow up saying Z, but I actually prefer it. But now it sounds so phony if I say it. But then you can also throw in the T parameter for time, right? So now you're an X, Y, Z, T.
Yes.
So you can think about how these things are moving, and and that creates a lot of fun. But also it can when you're first engaging feel very abstract and very kind of wishy-washy. But coming back to this idea though, but future studies, and then of course also with that is there is the methodological side of that, which is strategic
how you
foresight,
actually do this. Yes,
right?
Yes.
And so there's this the way that I like to talk about it is you have like these two sort of major components. There's the mindset, right? The idea of thinking about how do we think and engage about thinking about futures. Then there's the methodology,
the tools,
the actual tools of saying, okay, now that we've thought about it, what tools can we use to develop something that we can actually, because it is abstract, until you pull it down and say, okay, here are, and so the purpose of that is to make these scenarios
and
something to react to.
Really important with these tools. If you just have the mindset, it is really easy to spiral. This is where people start imagining impossible things and getting really anxious about the future. This is where you get the Terminator scenarios where AI decides to get rid of humanity. It's where we're all wiped out by some alien virus or whatever. So you've got to be able to put sort of boundaries on this, and you've got to have a process of filtering out what is plausible versus what is implausible or even impossible.
Yeah, that's perfectly right. And also, I mean, that's one of the reasons for engaging this is also to reduce a term there's other terms that mean the same thing, but essentially to reduce future shock, which is that because it is, you can go, well, if this were to happen and that were to happen, oh my God, it's all over.
We're all dead.
We're all gone. It's, and then there is that sort of like the sort of hair on fire moment. The reverse of that is also like, well, if this were to happen and this were to happen, we end up in, this, again, the Star Trek.
The utopia, yes.
Yeah, the post-scarcity.
The age of abundance, whatever. The lack of scarcity.
Yeah, right.
Age of abundance.
The age of abundance.
Yes.
The want not world, right?
Right.
So doing that alone can be fun and exciting.
Right. And there's a place for it, but you have to have a discipline to pull that back.
That's right. Yep. And so, and also, even if you're doing something professionally, right? Like futures thinking can just allow you to explore this rich vein of what's out there, what's possible. But then what you need is something like a tool set, like these forecasting tools, and there are Foresight tools, and there's many of them. No one tool is perfect. They all have their strengths, their weaknesses, and that's part of the role of, as you become experienced, is understanding which tools best fit this context or scenario. But the point of those tools are to give you examinable, actionable scenarios that you can investigate further to say, like, if this scenario were to come true, what does that mean for us?
Yes.
That could be good, it could be bad, it could be neutral.
Yep.
And then looking through those, trying to ascertain which ones might be very likely to happen, understanding what inflection points would be necessary. Also, because again, we have this T factor, the time.
Right.
Are we talking about 3 to 5 years? Are we
Sure.
talking 10? Are we talking 50? Are we talking 100 years?
Yep.
Obviously, those things get much more opaque and, but also more interesting to talk about, because another piece, another wonderful aspect, and this is why I think it's really helpful, especially if we can succeed of having younger people engage in futures thinking earlier on, is it also gives you a very safe space to talk about controversial or difficult questions, because something that is it's a skill that's developed is to be able to, in some ways, remove or at least temporarily suspend your emotional connection to things like the human race.
Right.
Because you can talk about things like existential problems or things that are systematic things that have, that in today's climate might be difficult conversations because it runs afoul of.
So you can push them out towards the future. And actually this gets back to a conversation about the Moviegoer's Guide from the future.
Yes, absolutely.
Because what movies do is it allows you to take one step back and think about possibilities and consequences in an environment where the personal stakes, the ideological stakes are lower than just exploring together what might be possible. Yep.
And I mean, in a very quick example, right, where you can see how this would work is if you were to sit a group of, I mean, it doesn't even matter. You could say like policymakers, lawmakers, right? Some of the people who might have some of the most rigid views of the next few years, and you say, we're going to redesign the city.
Right.
Okay. Everyone has probably maybe experienced what that is, or if you've ever held one of these kind of design meetings of like, it is chaos and everyone's arguing and it is
Post-it notes, isn't it?
Oh my God, death by Post-it note. Oh my gosh. And oftentimes it is this thing of like, well, we can't do that because that's not how we do it.
Right.
Or this is how we've always done it, so that way it needs to be this way. So a real quick flip on that is to use, and a lot of times places will use this concept of let's build a city on Mars, let's build a city on the moon, or whatever, because you're starting from a blank canvas, and then right, like making lots of assumptions, like again, the worst day on Earth environmentally is still better than any day on Mars, right? Because you can't breathe there. But still, holding all those assumptions aside, like yes, we can get there, we have the resources, don't worry about it. So you can hand wave that away to create this blank canvas that allows people to say, like, in 100 years from now or 500, I mean, you can play with it, right? Is say, like, now let's build a new colony. Well, that's a bad word. Let's build a new city.
Yes.
Let's build a city of community on this planet. You can even make one up, whatever. And then because what it does is allows for a blank slate to not, the intent then is to be able to think about what problems do we need to solve for? How do we do it without the burden of the present in some ways?
That is exactly it. And what that does, and actually just thinking about Mars, there are a number of people that have built these simulations of what it would be like to build a community on Mars. You begin to see really fast just how complex it is, and it becomes a mirror to life on Earth. If you start off by thinking, this is easy, you just sort of build a few sort of habitats, you sort of build a technology to sort of mine the area around and create sort of resources which allow you to create gizmos. What is difficult about this? And then you begin to realize that there are layers upon layers upon layers of making this succeed. And so once you've realized just how mind-bogglingly complex it is to do on Mars in the future, you begin to realize actually that's a mirror to what life is like now. So it allows you to begin to navigate the present in very, very different ways.
Absolutely. And that's a very powerful tool of we'll use this tool. And I'm sure I've mentioned it somewhere here, but there's a very common tool used that's called backcasting.
Yes.
Right. So once you can imagine that future state, and then, so even if you, in that scenario, even if you are able to come up with a good idea, you're like, all right, we've got it, we figured, and if anyone, I love what as you're talking about, I'm like, that was a hard lesson for me when I was like 9 years old playing SimCity, right? Or whatever. You're like, wow, this is much.
You were 9 when you were playing SimCity?
Oh, I was probably even younger. I don't know. I can't remember. But it was like the original Sim, not the one where you can control the people. The original SimCity.
I know. I know the one. We sort of, our whole office was playing it. There was about 2 months when we didn't do a single bit of work, I'm sure.
Well, and I don't know if it was just me, but you'd build this stuff the whole time. You're like, come on, Godzilla monster. Because that would be like, you would get like either some kind of natural disaster or like a Godzilla monster would come up and destroy. And it was always like, come on, Godzilla monster. But you realize, I mean, even in that very fun simulated video game version, you realize very quickly how complex all these pieces are, right?
So with this idea of backcasting sort of feeds into that, this idea of you imagine a future, usually about 10 years or so down the line, so the future you would like to see, and then you work out what are the steps between where we are now and how to get there. So that's the back bit of it.
That's the back bit. And that's, I mean, even you can see the traces of that even in the language we use for Future of Being Human, which is like, what actions do we need to take today to get, that's basically the action of backcasting once it's been done, right? Is where is this preferable state that you want to get into? And then what, regardless, whether that's 10 years or 100 years, from that point, working all the way back to today, what needs to start taking place? How do we start need to think about what actions are necessary for that potential to hopefully unfold, which you can never guarantee, but you're working towards that as opposed to just, again, throwing your hands up and just saying the future will happen to me and I'll just hope for the best.
That's it. So there's another aspect of this that I find really interesting, and that's the iterative aspect. So you start off with something like backcasting, where you get a group of people together and they imagine the sort of future they would like to see in 10 years' time, and you work backwards. Part of that process is usually people realizing maybe we're imagining the wrong future, or maybe we're asking the wrong question, or we've defined the problem wrong. And maybe we need to go back to the drawing board. Now we've gone through this process and really sort of rethink or tweak that idea of the future. Because sometimes we are so sure in our gut that we know what the future should be like. It's only when we begin to think about it that we realize actually we've got it wrong. We are so naive that we're creating what we thought was good, but actually it's going to hurt a lot of people and actually cause more problems than solutions.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up too, because that is part of it. That none of these, well, I would say it this way: anytime you engage in one of these tools, that is a snapshot from today, right? But that the power comes from that iterative process. This is not a one. That's why. That's why again, with futures thinking, it's a mindset and a philosophy. It's not just a thing you engage in one time, and you're done. I mean, you can do it one time and say I'm done, but you know,
it doesn't really serve its purpose.
You know, again, you know, if what you're planning is for tomorrow. Right. Okay. Probably you could probably get away with that. Right. But if you're thinking 10 years from now, 20 years from now,
in a complex society, where everybody else has got their own ideas about what that future is going to be like. And that I've got to throw this in as well, because this really winds me up. The people that I come across, and I would say more people than not, who have a clear idea of what they think the future should be like, but it's their future. It's a future that doesn't involve anybody else's decisions. And they say, it's easy to get there. We just need to tell people to do this, this, and this, or force them to do this, this, and this, or get them to do it, and the future will be great. But it depends on the only person with agency in that model being you, and everybody else being automata that actually do your will, your servants.
Yes, and that's really interesting. And you just brought something up too. There's a term for that also, which when we think about sort of this kind of comes back to one of these fundamental papers from Sohail Inatella from like these 6 pillars of, so he kind of, one of them is this idea of a used future, which is, is the concept of, and again, it's not about ascribing value, that it's bad, good, whatever. It's also recognizing that my vision of the future could be tainted by what I've been told, somebody else's future that they've prescribed to me. Like, you know, again, we talked about this before with like, you know, with movies, right? You know, when you see like Terminator, right? Just opening with the future as the robot stepping on a human skull is starting to inform how you think about the future.
That's it. Yes.
And we've had this conversation between like utopian futures and protopian futures, utopian futures, dystopian futures, and the role that those can play in sort of how the individual starts to think about about the future or their future. And therein also lies the danger is like putting it in the singular, thinking about my future.
Which is why we talk about futures plural.
That's why. And, to some people, it is interesting. I usually always have to, it's like, I'm like if I do a talk on this, it's usually like the 4th slide. And I'm like, by now, if you're sitting there going like, you're annoyed with me for always making this term plural,
right?
It is intentional because when we talk about the future, that is a singular, and you can arrive at a scenario for a possible future.
Yes.
But in general, when we talk about the future and the way people are thinking about it, it's plural. It's futures. Right. Because it is unknowable.
It's many possible states.
That's right.
The present is largely fixed, but even there, everybody experiences the present in different ways. So there are different presents. Yeah. Even more so with future, because they're not there yet. The waveform, if you like, hasn't collapsed yet. So there are many possibilities.
That's it. I mean, if you think about it, there is this kind of a sadness in some way because we aren't 4th dimensional beings, right? We can't control our own t variable. Is that we are in some ways, right? We can't access the past.
Right. Yep.
The future is unknowable and we're kind of stuck.
I know. Right. Yes.
I guess, I don't know.
But we can plan the pathways.
Yes.
And so this to me is where things get both exciting and important. So you can imagine these different future scenarios. You can begin to sort of plan how you increase the likelihood to getting to the ones you want. You can begin to understand that in a really complex web of influences with many people having different ideas.
Yeah.
But then you can start taking action. With these tools, you can take actions which increase the probability of getting towards the sort of future you want and move away from the sorts of futures that you don't want.
Yep, absolutely. And again, within there is all these other nested tools that help us look for, the risk factors, right? Unintended consequences, risks. How do we ensure we're not doing damage or harm to vulnerable populations? And I always take a moment to explain. Part of that vulnerable population is extended to our environment, to our planet as well, because like I said, until we find an Earth 2,
all interconnected.
Until we find an Earth 2, if we screw this one up, the planet will continue without us, without any trouble, right? Yes. And so
it's a planetary survival mechanism. If we become the sort of pathogen, there are mechanisms to get rid of us. Right. I think we might have already become a bit of a pathogen.
It's funny you mentioned that. This just triggered this wild memory. I wrote an essay in my senior year of high school that about the literally that the human race was a virus to the planet. Yep. And of course, when you're, how old are you? 17,
it feels
18.
Great. This original thought.
And it's just like, oh, this will really show them whatever. But the funny thing is I found that paper not that long ago and I read it again and it was like, had all the hallmarks of a teenager writing this stuff. Right, yes. But at the same time, I was like, damn, that's pretty good. Like it was one of those things where, coming back to it, 20 years on, I'm like, there was some good points in there.
That's
and
pretty good.
And sadly, it still resonates very well today with a lot of these things.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I've had this slide pulled up because I've been meaning to come back to this to touch on this. Because the language here is very intentional. And this is lifted directly out of Wendell Bell's sort of seminal 1963, I want to say it was. Basically, it's the volume 1, What is Future Studies? Right. So it's one of these sort of key texts from this the modern era of this discipline. And we talked before about the influence of H.G. Wells going back. Yes. But again, this idea of we study the history, we study business and economics. Why do we not study the future? But this line when it comes down to the proposal of what future studies is all about, right? And this language is very intentional. That it is basically to discover or invent, examine and evaluate and propose those possible, probable, and preferable futures, right? And it's really that the depth on discovering, inventing, right? So what could it be? What do we want it to be? What could we make it? And then pulling those apart and examining them, evaluating them, and then proposing what are the possible, preferable, and probable futures, so that we can react to them and make those decisions about how are we going to engage with these things.
So really tricky question for you. And I love the way you're sort of expanding on this. And part of my brain is thinking, I know why you're doing this, because we're supposed to be speaking to a class in a couple of weeks about exactly this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. I actually forgot about
You'd forgotten about that. You know, the one where our colleague asked us for a podcast episode that he could give to his students. This is that podcast episode.
What I meant to say was, yes, exactly.
Right.
That was the plan.
But here's the tricky question.
Yes.
How do you do this in a world of 8 billion people where everybody has got their own ideas, their own philosophies, their own traditions, and their own directions they want to go in? It is messy. There is no way of sort of building sort of an overarching consensus with everybody. So how do you then feed these great ideas and tools into a really messy world?
Yeah. Well, I think the easy escape for that, right, is that what you're doing, again, because you're not predicting the future.
Right.
So off the bat, you're safe from making a mistake of like, in 10 years, we'll all have this.
Yes.
So you're safe from that. But the power of these tools as they walk you through them is you are supposed to, as the horizon scan, and I mentioned this thing called megatrends.
Yes. Yep.
The point of megatrends, or another tool that you can use of like sources of macro disruptions, is that one is a little bit smaller. It's easier to understand. Think of a wheel that has 11 sort of 11 industries or sectors on it. So it's things like education, healthcare, government, geopolitics, sustainability, or public health, right? So you have these large sectors. And one of the things to keep in mind is, as you're thinking about wherever, because your futures are going to stem from your context regardless. I mean, that's nature, right? Yes, there are too many variables. What you can't do, because we're not predicting the future, is it would be a fool's errand to say, I'm going to do this for the entire world, right?
Yes.
So you also have to do a mechanism of scoping, right? What is it that you're actually trying to look at, and define that, so that other people can see what, like the scenarios that Andrew creates were scoped for what.
Right.
And in there, the hope is that through going through these tools that you've also done the due diligence to look across, to do a horizon scan, to see what are the other disruptions, innovations that are happening in other parts of, again, the world. These are, and this is a rich thing, because if all you do is look at a very narrow scope of the things that are happening in your bubble,
you're going to get it
these
wrong.
Scenarios are, I'm going to tell you right now, those scenarios are garbage.
Right.
They're not very useful, because what you've done is you've completely cut off, or you've militated your ability to actually see what's happening in the world.
Right.
And that takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of time to learn how to do that.
But also getting back to this idea of a mindset. It's a mindset.
Yes.
And it's a mindset of being cognizant of other people, other scopes, other perspectives, and having the humility or the willingness to compromise and negotiate and come to a common understanding, which may be not perfectly aligned with yours, but it's something that's workable.
Absolutely. And I think, again, with that mindset comes this, and over time as it's practiced, you come with a sense of, I guess maybe you would say you build up a thicker skin to ask very hard questions about what it, like your
and other
context.
people ask you very hard questions.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Or like, I think I've used this example before, but when you walk into a university president's office and you're like, does the university belong here in 100 years? Like, let's have that conversation. But it's also, I'll talk about it at times too, of this practice of flaring and focusing.
Okay.
Right. So when you flare, this is when you're doing your horizon scan. You're looking around, you're paying attention to, like I come back to things like when we did the report on the World Economic Forum, the 10, those are coming from all over the place.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Same idea is looking for what are these innovations, what are these disruptions, these new convergences that are happening all over the world, not just in the global north, not just coming out of Silicon Valley, but what are the innovations that are happening in, the global south? And not just, these are not limited to technological innovations.
No, but you look at sort of rural communities. How are they solving problems? How are they finding new ways of thinking and doing things?
There's a terrible example, there's an unfortunate piece that comes along with human history, is that conflict and war drives a lot of innovation.
Right.
And we're seeing that at even right now with like the Ukraine conflict and things, right? Just the amount of ingenuity that is being forced because of this conflict and things that you're like, wow, that's learned. Now we know how to do those things. And maybe that's maybe that's not good.
Right.
But these things happen, and if you're not paying attention, now you can't be an expert. That's the other side of this, right? There's the human lifespan is not long enough to be an expert in all areas of everything, right?
Future studies experts not welcome, right?
We're looking for polymaths.
But I love again that humility.
Yeah.
The idea that there is something important here, something that you can sort of develop a discipline for, a way of thinking about. But you also have to realize the limitations of supposed expertise.
Absolutely, because if you foreclose your scan, it's like the ostrich just protecting. You're like, well, I'm just going to stick my head in the ground and just hope that nothing hurts me.
Yes.
You
become sort of an ideologue and sort of say, this is how I've been trained to see the world between these two narrow lines, and I'm never going to stray outside those lines. So you never ever see the things that are in front of you.
Yeah, and then of course, if you are in that position and you gain power and influence, that's very dangerous.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the idea with these things as well, is being aware that, and this another piece to this is this broader perspective that if any disruption or innovation that happens is not in isolation, even if it first appears to be, that if we're sitting here in higher education and in the tech industry, we feel those all the time, AI, all these things, right? Or even just like health. I mean, look at, again, AI is a good one because it's top of mind, it's everywhere. But even if you think about that technological innovation, and go across that wheel, how is that AI impacting education, healthcare, government, all these things, right? You can start media and telecommunications, wealth distribution. I mean, you can start to see how that one technological innovation or convergence or whatever is having this ripple across all these different sectors.
And then, so I thinking through this, and I actually have a couple of big questions I want to ask you. But the first one is, this all sounds great. It sounds reasonable. It sounds something we should be doing. How does that work in practice, especially from a corporate perspective or an organizational perspective, not the personal one at the moment?
Sure.
I mean, are there jobs out there? Do people train to sort of in future studies to become is this where futurists go?
It's the corner of LinkedIn where we all hide.
Right. If you're a company like Intel, who are you employing, or OpenAI or Anthropic?
It's an interesting place because there definitely are. Well, one, you should. I think there's a couple of ways to think about it.
Right,
one is that there are people who are embedded in an organization who are part of it.
Yes.
Who engage in this type of work, and again, sometimes. People who are doing lots of strategic planning and things like that are probably already engaging in a lot of the tools without even calling it.
So they may not have gone through the formal training. They may not have a degree in it.
But they might be doing a lot of these things.
Stuff they're doing.
I mean, like you had mentioned, people who do risk analysis, they're doing a lot of these parts already.
Yep.
But so you have people who, a lot of times there are terms like futurist and residents and stuff like that. And they come from different eras. That's one thing that is also such a beautiful thing about like futures in general is you don't have to have a degree to start doing this work.
Right.
It's there for you. You can
listen to a podcast.
You can listen to this podcast. I'll put links in the show notes for toolkits that are open and free.
Yep.
That you can go to and you can start engaging with these tools. Again, in your professional context, your personal context, but from a professional perspective, it is one of those things that there are a few degree programs here and there. It's not very prevalent.
Yep.
A lot of times you'll get futures sprinkling through other disciplines. Through sometimes they come in business programs, otherwise like history programs, science and technology programs. Rarely do you walk out with a few exceptions, with a degree that says futures studies or something.
Yep.
But with that then too, is then you can be part of the organization directly.
Right. Yep.
Or a lot of times, a lot of consulting firms will be set up where you come in. A lot of those, yes. And there's some, Amy Webb is, I did a summer fellowship with her quite a few years ago now, back when it was the Future Today Institute. Now it's the Future Today Strategy Group. I think they renamed their title. But that's a large, very high profile organization that, they come into governments and corporations to help them do exactly these things. Because a lot of times the structures of existing companies, new or old, don't think this way.
Right.
And that's one of the challenges.
So they need to buy-in talent, effectively, or expertise.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then there's individuals who, and again, you can engage in this from a very practical way or a theoretical way.
But
it
also, it strikes me, looking, especially in the tech sector.
Email me, I'll come do your thing for you.
There we are. It's your subtle pitch.
I need that eVTOL, man. I got to find a way to fundraise for that.
But I'm thinking, yes, I can see how the world works in a conventional way, in that you have sort of future studies or future focused consultancies that sort of come in. But at the same time, it feels like that sort of this need to think in futures ways is at the very core of everything every organization should be doing. It's not something that you buy in and bolt on. It's something that should be embedded in the organizational sort of expertise and structure and mindset. And that means that somehow you've got to be employing people that understand at least something about this and understand its importance and how to go about doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think this is also a growing, as more people are becoming aware of, there's always a danger in my perspective. It's like, you don't want it to become overly popular, because then it gets watered down really quick.
Of course, yes.
Because it's just like, look at LinkedIn. How many people have added something about AI, blah, blah, blah?
Everybody's an AI expert now.
Exactly.
Yes.
And there's a danger of that too, because
everybody becomes a futures expert.
Exactly.
Or futurist,
and that can be dangerous. Just because, because it can water down people who are using it just in name versus people who are actually engaging in these kind of tools.
Yeah.
But it is really interesting. And there are, and again, the concept of future studies, the intentionality of it is a newer thing in the United States in general. It is something that has been practiced much more prevalently.
We've talked about this in Europe, yes.
And in Europe, and of course, and some of the roots of these things come in, a quote that's often used as this sort of like non-attributed quote about the best time to plant a tree. Do you know this one?
No.
It's like, the question is, what's the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. Right.
Yes.
And so that's kind of like this, kind of funny way or whatever of saying the same can be applied to futures thinking and strategic foresight. It's like, you should have been doing it a long time
20
ago.
years ago, but failing that today.
Today is a good time to start.
Yes.
And so we've seen this a lot, especially post World War II was a massive sort of reinvestment of this in the EU, for example.
Right, yes.
But also, again, other cultures that have existed for far longer have been doing this without it being called futures thinking and stuff like that. Even going back to these old stories of these old monasteries, right, where the tree, if they were built, I forget the exact, there's a particular example and I'm forgetting the specifics of it, but the idea was a specific type of tree was felled to use the wood to create this monastery. And the monks knew that to replace those boards when they would wear out eventually, they had to grow the trees. So it was the forethought of already planning for the future. Yes. Planning for the future. And you can see this also, represented across cultural ways that, intentional or just by way of the circumstance or the context of buildings that have lasted for hundreds of years, if not even longer, to buildings that only last 20, 30 years, right? In that thinking of, well, we didn't think about the future. We didn't care. Bringing back, we pull back in the care concept here, right?
Of course. Which I'm glad you did, because it's critical to this. Because if you think about the core of care, it's thinking about the consequences of what we do, how we think, how we behave, not only sort of to our immediate community, but more broadly than that, and over time as well to the next generation, the generation after that. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, one thing I guess I'll kind of wrap up my pitch here, and I hope I've converted some people out there to be like, well, so I need to engage in futures. I did have another question when you've wrapped up. Yes. Oh, you go ahead and ask the question. No. So I was interested in sort of organizations, but also, and I know we're going to come back to this on the podcast, so this is a little bit of a teaser, but you did mention sort of young people and K through 12. Yeah. So how in your mind, and this is sort of teeing up sort of a future podcast episode, but how in your mind does this fit into K through 12 education? When, especially if you're looking at the earlier side of that, teachers are already stressed teaching kids how to sort of read, how to write, how to do basic math, how to sort of grow and learn how to learn. Are we in danger of just putting another thing on them? If you were careless, yes. Right.
But we're not going to be careless.
Okay.
We're going to have care with this.
Because we think about the future.
That's right. Because what's the point of adding another burden? And I forget which episode it was. It was one of the AI ones where I really popped off on this issue.
Right.
Because I think it is inappropriate for us to continuously just add more responsibilities onto an overworked, overburdened profession as it is.
And both of us are married to teachers, so this is partially where this comes from.
Very close to our hearts.
Yes.
But also, I mean, even, as someone who has spent, a large portion of my career in the ed tech field too, it's the same. You see the same constraints there. Well, you should be using the latest technology. It's like, well, okay, but how you don't just add it because that's just a recipe for disaster. Or even if it's well intended, the realities of such are we don't have time. We can't do this. We don't have time. It's all that kind of stuff. The good thing about layering things like futures thinking is, again, most of those pieces are already there.
Right.
It's what so. In this is coming from my perspective, so you can send your hate mail to me. My perspective on what I would envision as one of the most powerful integrations or infusions of futures thinking into a K-12 environment is by integrating it into the existing curriculum as it is.
Yep.
What I don't think we should do is tack on a module or a new learning objective that is like, you will now learn futures thinking. I think there was an incredible push for this around computer science and the everyone can code stuff, which has had, depending on who you talk to, it has some mixed results about forcing people to think about the world through the lens of just like this coding.
Yep.
I don't think this is a good way to do that.
Right.
Because futures thinking does a few things, right? And think about this already in the context of K-12 education.
Yep.
So by putting futures thinking in practice, it helps students be able to basically evaluate what's happening in the world around them and think about ways of handling that uncertainty, taking grasp of that. It strengthens creative problem solving. It gives people an opportunity to start thinking, again, that focus and flair. It allows people to think big. It allows them to think, pull in these imaginative, wild ideas. It provides opportunities to explore those ill-defined problems, those difficult conversations. Reduces that future shock, right? Allows people to feel like they're a participant.
Sure, yes.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, to me, I feel like that's one of the most powerful things to give young students the perspective and the feeling that they have agency in where this world goes is huge.
Yep.
Because we need them.
Yep.
We need them to be active. We need them to have a voice. We need them to engage.
More so than ever.
More so than ever.
Which things are going. Yes.
Right? I mean, I think about my own generation. I'm like, where was this when we were, because honestly, I mean, I think there so much of this, you just become a passenger rather than understanding how much you can actually control by going through these processes, right? This, again, creates this ability to start planning, to start thinking about how to do this. And again, having that space for difficult conversations. How do you talk about these big systemic issues of injustice or biases in a way that you can have that conversation safely, securely, without having people feel like they're being outed or, putting their, it's a way of pulling those things out. And so you can think about like the curriculum that already exists, adding the futures thinking component to that is a way of, again, that it's that mindset of how you're going through, whether that be modules or learning around social studies or history or language. I mean, all of these things combined, the idea is understanding and getting towards the educators to understand the value of using this lens and this mindset of futures thinking to talk about the things they're already talking about.
Yes. Yep. And of course, in my mind, the incredible importance of that, as well as personal development. And as you said, it touches on so many things that we think are important in education and learning. But also, if you think about the context of today's world, which is going faster technologically than ever before, it is more integrated and more interconnected than ever before. It is more resource constrained than ever before. Things are moving faster with incredibly sort of big consequences than ever before. We have to be bringing up a generation that can not only survive that and navigate it, but thrive in it. Absolutely. And at the moment, we're not teaching those skills.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with that more. And I think, coming back to, I don't want to invoke Dewey again, but I will. But again, using this future thinking.
You're going to call him the original futurist at this rate.
But there is a piece to that, right?
Yep.
But also, I mean, I think that would be my last pitch here is, bringing the futures thinking in as the mindset for tackling these things. Mm-hmm. Also, again, look at all these things of how in those tools, those methodologies, it is ripe for supporting those natural, impulses for inquiry, exploring the world around it. What is our future? What does the future mean for me? What does it look like for me? How is this going to unfold? The communication, talking with one another. How do you think? How do you express? Learning from one another in that way. Building something, actually making stuff, creating those scenarios. This could happen, this could happen, this could. Once you've made, it's fun to see when it happens, and it's hard to explain until someone experiences it. Actually putting down on paper or, digitally or typing it or whatever, these scenarios, the sense of agency that instantly translates to you of going, wow, I just did that. And I just wrote a future. I just put that in the universe just to speak. And then of course the expression of having what does this mean for you, and because we all bring that. And so again, this is a way of kind of tying these all things together. And even again, in the space of K-12, and I'll extend this to higher education as well, as we're constantly looking for and having these conversations around how AI is changing the sort of rote mechanics of a lot of sort of academic evaluations, like with the 5-paragraph essay and these kind of things. It's create assignments through these methods that you aren't cheatable. These are not cheatable assignments. And that way it gives students an opportunity to use those tools to leverage their ideas and take them to the next level, as opposed to typing in should it be, hitting copy paste, and then you're done.
And I love that framing back to Dewey, because everything begins to slot into place and make perfect sense. As you were saying that, I could imagine sort of a new learning movement sort of based around futures thinking that goes all the way back to Dewey's work. So it's actually not reinventing the wheel, because this has been done, but you're putting an additional layer of nuance on that, empowering people to think differently about the future and have agency there. And I know this is, I'm doing sort of future scenarios, this is land of fantasy, but that concept, especially in this day and age, is unbelievably powerful. So you can imagine this concept of a future school that begins to pull all this together.
Absolutely. And this is the vision, this is this multi-dimensional vision that I have floating in there. And then that's the thing, is so now we just need a boatload of money to make it happen and people to invest in it. But
if anybody wants to launch a future school, we thought of it first.
We're your team. We got it there. I will submit this to the U.S. Copyright Office as an example of we thought of it first. No, but I think, and I'll just end with this last thing. And I have an AI tool, but we'll save it for maybe next time. It would give me a chance to play with it a little bit more, because also it has eaten half my laptop battery in the 1 hour, so 60 minutes.
This is the little teaser. What has Sean been distracted by as we've been having this conversation?
I'll give you a small hint. It's watching me and telling me all about myself while we're doing this. But I'll end with this quote, because this comes from Klaus Schwab.
Okay. Yes.
All right. So original founder and CEO of the World Economic Forum. And it's a great quote that I use this all the time when doing a futures talk to express, again, why now, right? From the perspective of human history, there has never been a time of greater promise or potential peril, right? So get on it, people. We think about the future. Let's make a brighter path, and let's figure out how do we get there to ensure human flourishing.
This is important.
Absolutely. Well, awesome.
We should wrap up.
Yeah, I think, and for the class that's coming up that we knew about, that I did not forget about.
Just for you.
Just for you. Oh, yeah. No, fantastic. Well, awesome as always. And we'll share the little AI tool next time, I think, because it'll be fun. And I'll have some time to play with it to see what, because it was a little bit of a surprise, but a lot of fun. And but I'll put some links in the show notes that can take you to some of the open tool sets and things around strategic foresight and futures, so you can dive deeper into those. And Andrew, awesome conversation. Always
great as always, Sean.
So much fun.
Pleasure.
Until next time, I'll be on my eVTOL flying around and
waving at all the poor plebs underneath you that don't have them.
That's right, you suckers! Until all of a sudden my battery just drops, and I like, or my AI tool just chewed up half the battery in my quadcopter or whatever it is. So, fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And again, if you are enjoying the content that we are creating, a great way to support Modem Futura is to like and leave us a review, and of course share with anybody else you think might benefit from these. Also, we were joking about putting this content in classes, but also for our colleagues that are out there, I think Modem Futura is a great source of conversations, or even just provocations to use for getting conversations going. And it's free. We put it out there for free. So absolutely. So from myself and from Andrew, we'll see you next time on the next episode of Modem Futura.
We'll see you then.
Demodulating signal.
Modem Futura is a production of the Future of Being Human initiative at Arizona State University. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. To learn more about the Future of Being Human initiative and all of our other projects, please visit us on the web at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu.
End transmission.